Today, I want to tell you a story. A story about an emperor so powerful, even his elephants delivered justice. Yes, you heard that right. He didn't always use swords or prisons. When someone did something truly terrible, stealing, killing, betraying, the emperor would call for his elephant. A mighty beast with feet so big, one stomp could end everything. And I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. But don't be afraid, not now. You're safe in your room, tucked in your bed. So go ahead. Fluff your pillow. Pull up your blanket and dim your lights. Because tonight I'm going to tell you everything. The whole story, from the very beginning. So close your eyes now and listen closely. I'll tell you of the bandits, the rebels, and the elephant named Hiram, the one who crushed, and sometimes the one who forgave. This is not just a story of punishment. It's a story of justice. And it all began long ago, under the shadow of a great red stone palace. I write these words as an old man, with unsteady hand but a clear memory. My name is Arjun, and I was born a simple villager in the Mughal Empire when Emperor Akbar reigned over Hindustan. In my youth, I never imagined I would one day stand in the halls of the emperor's court, witnessing life and death dispensed at the foot of a mighty elephant. Yet fate carried me from the dusty lanes of my village to the red sandstone palace of Fatehpur Sikri, where I saw wonders and terrors I will never forget. In those days, Emperor Akbar, Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, known to all as Akbar the Great, ruled a vast kingdom with wisdom and iron will. His empire stretched further than a man could travel in months, from the snow-capped mountains in the north to the jungles and ocean in the south. We heard many stories of Akbar's fairness and might. Some tales made us laugh, like the clever antics of his advisor Birbal. Others filled us with awe, like the legend of the emperor riding a wild elephant into battle or pardoning a defeated enemy. To us villagers, Akbar seemed half legend, a man blessed by God with power over all, even over the mightiest of beasts. It was said that in the emperor's court, justice was swift and sometimes strange. Among the most astonishing practices was the use of the royal elephant to carry out executions. The very idea sounded like a fantasy or a dark joke. An elephant acting as the empire's executioner. In our village, parents would scold misbehaving children by warning them that if they stole or lied, the emperor's elephant would come to trample them flat. We all imagined that giant creature as a lurking monster waiting for sinners. It didn't quite seem real. But it was real, as I would come to learn with my own eyes. I still recall the first time I heard the name of the emperor's executioner elephant. I was a boy, sitting around the evening fire with my family, when a traveling storyteller passed through. Between recounting the glories of Akbar's battles, he lowered his voice and told us about Hiran, the elephant of judgment. Hiran, he whispered, is no ordinary elephant. He weighs as much as a dozen water buffalo, and with one step he can make a man as flat as a chapati. We children gasped and giggled nervously at that image. A man pressed into flatbread by an elephant's foot. My mother clicked her tongue at the storyteller for frightening us, but even she leaned in to hear more. The storyteller went on. Hiran serves as the emperor's final justice. When a criminal is sentenced to death, Akbar merely raises his hand, and Hiran's keeper brings the beast forward to carry out God's will. Some say the emperor trusts Hiran to know the guilty from the innocent. If the man is truly guilty, Hiran will crush him without hesitation. But if the man is innocent— Here the storyteller paused dramatically. We all waited, hearts thumping. Finally, he chuckled darkly and said, "Well, no innocent man has ever stood before Hiran. Or, if one did, he never lived to tell." A few men laughed uneasily. The rest of us sat in silence, picturing that immense elephant and the awful duty it performed. That night I barely slept. I had nightmares of a giant elephant chasing me through my father's wheat fields. In the dream, I tripped and fell, and the elephant's enormous gray foot came down, blotting out the sky. I woke with a scream, shaking and sweaty. My father brought a lamp and calmed me, telling me it was just a dream. He had no idea what visions had stampeded through my young mind. From that day on, the image of the emperor's elephant executioner haunted me, half terror, half fascination. Years later, I would come face to face with Hiran and see the truth of those stories. I would stand in Akbar's court, amidst marble pillars and silk banners, and watch as that elephant meted out justice at the emperor's command. I would witness cruelty and mercy, horror and honor, all intertwined in the actions of man and beast. Now, as an old man, I feel compelled to record these tales. Perhaps there is a lesson in them for those who come after. A lesson about power, justice, and the dignity of life. The first time I laid eyes on Hiran, the emperor's famed elephant, I felt my heart stutter with a mix of fear and wonder. I had arrived at Fatehpur Sikri only a week before, a youth hungry for adventure and opportunity. The emperor's new capital was a marvel, a whole city of palaces and gardens perched on a ridge above the plain. Each morning I wandered its broad avenues of reddish stone, gaping at the carved archways and gilded domes. I was just another face in the throng of hopefuls who gathered at the palace gates, wishing to witness Akbar's legendary court in session. On that fateful morning, I squeezed myself into the Diwan-i-Am, the hall of public audience, determined to see the emperor dispense justice. Little did I know I would also see Hiran deliver a grim sentence. The Diwan-i-Am was a vast courtyard open to the sky, with polished pillars supporting a high pavilion where the emperor sat. I managed to find a spot behind a column, rising on tiptoe to peer over taller men in front of me. My first glimpse of Akbar himself nearly took my breath away. There he was, seated on a raised marble platform shaded by a canopy of silk. Even from a distance, I could sense his presence, calm and commanding. He wore a turban of bright green cloth that morning, a large emerald glinting on his forehead, and his robe was of golden silk. A long peacock feather fan swayed gently behind him in a servant's hand. To his right and left stood nobles and ministers, including one middle-aged man with a sharp mustache whom a whispering spectator identified to me as Raja Birbal, the emperor's favorite advisor. I felt a thrill realizing I was in the presence of people from the stories I'd heard as a child. Before the emperor, at ground level, petitioners and accused men were brought forward one by one. Each bowed low, foreheads nearly touching the polished floor before speaking. The emperor listened in silence as a gray-bearded qazi, a judge, read out the details of each case. There was a dispute over a well between two brothers, which Akbar settled with a few thoughtful questions and a firm instruction that they share the water equally. Then came a trembling old woman who claimed a noble's horses had trampled her wheat field. The emperor ordered compensation from the noble's purse without hesitation. I was awed at how fairly and swiftly he dealt with these matters, just as the tales said. But the atmosphere in the courtyard shifted when the guards dragged in the next prisoner. He was a skinny, wild-eyed man with matted hair, wrists bound in iron. Two guards had to hold him upright. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience as people craned to see. "Who is that?" I quietly asked a merchant standing next to me. The man replied under his breath, "Some highway dacoit, caught robbing and murdering travelers." I felt a chill. Bandits were the terror of the countryside, and it seemed one had finally met his match with imperial justice. The Qazi unrolled a scroll and announced the crimes. The prisoner had ambushed a merchant caravan on the royal road, killed 2 men, and stolen goods. The emperor's face remained unreadable, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. The accused bandit, swaying on unsteady feet, suddenly began shouting, "Mercy, Jahan Pana! Mercy, I was driven by hunger," he howled, using a title for the emperor that meant protector of the world. One of the guards cuffed the back of his head to silence him. A hush fell. Everyone looked to Akbar, waiting for his response. For a long moment the emperor said nothing. He only stared down at the bandit, who quivered under that gaze. I was close enough to see Akbar's eyes, dark and keen, and just then hard as flint. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried across the silent courtyard. "You shed innocent blood on my roads," he said. "Justice will be done." He made a slight gesture with 2 fingers to the vizier at his side. My heart quickened, because I had heard about this gesture in fireside tales. The vizier bowed and clapped his hands loudly. From a shaded alcove to one side of the hall, there was a sudden clang of a large bell and the shuffle of heavy footsteps. The crowd parted in a hurry, people pressing back against the walls or ducking behind columns, clearing an open space on the floor. Through the wide path now open, an enormous shape lumbered forward. My mouth went dry. It was Hiran. He seemed even larger than the storyteller had described, a towering elephant with broad flapping ears and a massive head that nearly reached the height of the pavilion floor itself. His skin was dark gray, caked in places with dust from his pen, and decorated on his forehead and trunk with swirling patterns of white and red paint. 2 curved tusks jutted out, their tips capped with brass fittings that shone in the sunlight. Around Hiran's neck hung a thick rope of marigold flowers like a garland, incongruous for such a fearsome creature. And on his back was a small cushioned seat where his mahout, his driver, sat guiding him. As Hiran emerged, I felt the heat radiating from his huge body and caught a whiff of a scent that clung to him. A mix of earthy musk, crushed grass, and a tang of smoky spice. Each step he took landed with a solid thump on the ground, and I swear I felt the stone floor tremble beneath my feet. The audience watched in dead silence, many with hands pressed together in prayer or lips moving in whispered invocations to God. We all knew we were about to see judgment executed in the most literal way. The bandit, too, had seen the elephant. His defiance melted instantly into terror. "No, no, please," He shrieked, trying to back away, but the guards held him firm and forced him forward to the center of the clearing. One guard barked an order, and another tossed a small flat cushion onto the floor. They shoved the condemned man down until his head was positioned on that cushion, which rested atop a wide, flat stone embedded in the courtyard, specifically for this grim purpose. My stomach turned as I realized the stone was likely there to provide a solid surface for what was coming. The mahout on Hiran's back spoke a low command and tapped behind the elephant's ear with a hooked goad. Obediently, Hiran halted a few paces from the prostrate prisoner. The elephant's great head swayed slowly side to side, as if he were considering the whimpering human at his feet. For a moment, I had the wild thought that perhaps Hiran would refuse, that he might remember some spark of gentle nature and spare the man. But Hiran was a creature trained by the Emperor's will since youth. He knew what was expected. At another word from the mahout, Hiran raised his trunk, curling it upward. A deep rumble emanated from him, a low growl that grew into a trumpeting call that echoed off the courtyard walls. The sound jolted through my bones. It was both magnificent and terrifying, like the roar of thunder given life. The bandit on the ground let out a final despairing wail. Then, with surprising swiftness for such a giant, Hiran lifted his right front foot and swung it forward. A collective gasp escaped the crowd as that enormous foot, broad as a dining table, came down directly upon the prisoner's head and chest, pressing them into the cushion and stone beneath. I caught a glimpse of the man's eyes wide with horror, a split second before impact, and then I saw nothing but the elephant's leg where the man had been. For an instant, all was silent. Hiran held his foot there, and I could see the tension in the massive muscles of his leg and shoulder. A muffled crunch reached my ears, a sound I will never be able to forget, like the snapping of a great many dry twigs at once. Some in the crowd winced or looked away. My own knees felt weak. The bandit's cry had been cut off abruptly. When Hiran finally lifted his foot and set it back down a step away, the figure on the ground was terribly still and grotesquely flattened. The cushion was soaked through with blood, which now began to spread in a dark pool across the stone floor. I realized I had been holding my breath. I exhaled shakily. A few gasps and sobs came from onlookers. Not everyone had a stomach of iron. One young man near me fainted outright, and two others quietly carried him out of the hall. But many in the crowd simply stared in morbid fascination. Some even nodded grimly, as if satisfied that justice had been properly served. High above on his platform, Emperor Akbar raised his hand again. The vizier announced in a loud, steady voice, "So dies any man who sheds innocent blood on the emperor's roads. Let all present bear witness to his majesty's justice." His words rang out in the hushed space. The emperor himself looked on impassively for a moment, then closed his eyes briefly. I wondered what he felt behind that stern royal mask. Triumph? Sorrow? Or simply resolve? With a motion to one of his attendants, Akbar then stood and left the pavilion, presumably retiring to his private chambers. The public audience was over, and the emperor's verdict had been carried out without a word wasted. As the court began to disperse, I remained rooted to the spot, staring at the aftermath. 4 men came quickly with a cloth tarp, covering the remains before carrying them away. Another attendant poured buckets of water over the stone, washing the blood off the polished floor. Hiran stood calmly nearby throughout this cleanup, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The great elephant swung his trunk and snuffed at the air. I could see dark, intelligent eyes beneath his painted brow. Was he looking at the blood being scrubbed away? Did that sight mean anything to him at all? It was impossible to tell. Hiran seemed neither agitated nor excited, just calm, even bored as he waited. I was shaken, but also strangely mesmerized by the elephant. Stepping forward from behind my pillar, I allowed myself a closer look now that much of the crowd had gone. Hiran's mahout gently steered him around to turn back toward the alcove where they had emerged. As they did, the elephant passed within a few arms' lengths of where I stood. I felt dwarfed. He was like a living tower of flesh and muscle. Looking up at Hiran's looming form, I noticed scars crisscrossing his hind legs. Old battle scars, I guessed. A palace guard lingering nearby noticed my awestruck expression. The guard smiled wryly and said, "You won't forget that sight, will you, lad?" "No, sir," I managed to reply, my voice weak. "So, that is Hiran." "That it is. The Emperor's beloved executioner," the guard affirmed. He spoke with a kind of grim pride. "Serves the Padishah's justice better than any blade. Hiran's been with His Majesty since the early days. Fought in wars, too. You know, he once saved the Emperor's life in battle." I looked at the guard, eyebrows raised. This was new to me. "Truly?" The man nodded. "Indeed. Years ago, in a clash against a rebel lord, some enemies tried to rush the Emperor. But Hiran was there. He swung his trunk and tossed the attackers aside like rag dolls, crushed a few underfoot as if they were ants. Since then, His Majesty trusts him like a brother." He chuckled softly, adding under his breath, "Though God forbid any of us end up under those feet." I gulped at the vivid image his words conjured. The guard's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a necessary but unpleasant duty. "How many have been executed this way?" I asked quietly, my eyes drawn back to the elephant now ambling towards the exit. The guard scratched his beard. "Hard to say. Dozens at least. Bandits like that one, traitors, murderers. Hiran doesn't discriminate. Big or small, he'll flatten them all the same. I've seen him crush a giant Afghan warrior with armor and all, plate and bones crumpled like clay." He made a crushing gesture with his boot on the ground. My stomach flipped. Behind Hiran, a handler was now placing a bundle of bananas and a pile of sugarcane stalks on the ground. They were rewarding the elephant for a job well done. Hiran reached out with his trunk and took the bananas, popping an entire cluster into his mouth. The tension in my chest eased a little as I watched the creature chew contentedly. In that moment, Hiran looked almost gentle, just an animal enjoying a sweet treat. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful giant with the ruthless executioner I had just seen in action. As Hiran was led away, I noticed something else. A series of small, circular stone projections studded the shaft of a tall tower visible beyond the courtyard walls. The tower rose high, with those decorative bumps spiraling around it. I had heard of this monument. Hiran Minar, the Elephant Tower. Whispers in the palace claimed it was built to honor Akbar's favorite elephant. They say he'll bury Hiran there when the time comes, the guard beside me commented, following my gaze. Build him a tomb fit for a prince. Emperor Akbar doesn't forget his own, not even the four-legged ones. I nodded silently. The idea of an animal receiving a tomb and tower astonished me, yet after witnessing the event today, it was clear Hiran was no ordinary creature in this court. He was both feared and cherished, a dispenser of death and a guardian of the emperor. That morning, I left the diwan I am shaken to my core. Outside, the sun was dazzling and life went on. Birds chirped in the gardens, courtiers hurried on their errands, and merchants called out wares in the distant bazaar. But my mind replayed the execution again and again. The bandit's last plea, the sickening crunch, the silent authority with which Akbar watched it all. And of course, Hiran. How easily he had snuffed out a life on command. As I wandered through the palace complex, I realized that Hiran was more than a mere executioner. To Emperor Akbar and his subjects, the elephant was a symbol of justice that was as powerful and unyielding as the great beast itself. Hiran represented the emperor's reach, the idea that no criminal could escape the crushing weight of Akbar's law. And yet, seeing the elephant fed and praised afterward, I sensed another side. Hiran was also a symbol of the emperor's control over nature's might, of a harmony between man and beast forged by trust and training. The storyteller in my village had said Hiran might know the guilty from the innocent. Watching him that day, I doubted the elephant cared for guilt or innocence. He simply obeyed his master's will. The judgment came from Akbar. Hiran was the instrument. But in the eyes of the people, it was as if the elephant itself embodied justice, an almost mythic presence that could administer fate impartially and without emotion. There was a strange comfort in that thought, even though it was also terrifying. That day marked the beginning of my new life at Akbar's court. In the weeks that followed, I found work as a lowly attendant, sweeping courtyards, running messages, whatever small tasks were needed, which allowed me to remain in the palace city. I wanted to be near the center of things to see and hear more, and I especially kept my ears open for any mention of Hiran. The other servants told me stories late at night in the barracks, how Hiran had once knelt in respect when the emperor approached, or how at times Akbar would personally feed the elephant sweet confections with his own hand. Some even claimed Akbar confided in Hiran like a friend in lonely moments. I pictured the mighty emperor resting a hand on the elephant's trunk, perhaps whispering thoughts he shared with no human soul. Whether those tales were true or embroidered by imagination, one thing was certain. The bond between Akbar and Hiran was unique. Having witnessed Hiran's devastating power, I understood why the emperor valued him so. An elephant could enforce justice in a way that left an unforgettable impression. I know it left one on me. In the months to come, I would see Hiran in action several more times, and each time I learned something new about justice, fear, and even mercy. But before I recount those events, let me take you back to where I came from, to the village life I left behind. For only by understanding the humble world of my origins can one appreciate how extraordinary Akbar's court and his elephant's judgment truly were. Before I stood in Akbar's court under marble arches, I was a barefoot boy running in the dusty lanes of a small village. My village, Jahangirpur, lay nestled by a slow-flowing river, surrounded by miles of wheat fields and mango orchards. Life there was simple and steady, tied to the rhythms of the seasons. We woke at sunrise to the crowing of roosters and worked till our shadows grew long in the fields. In the evenings, under the soft glow of oil lamps, we shared stories to pass the time. It was a world far removed from the grand courts of emperors. And yet, even in our remote hamlet, the emperor's presence was felt in our hearts and minds. I grew up hearing the name of Akbar spoken with admiration and sometimes fear. To my parents and neighbors, he was more than a distant ruler. He was a symbol of stability in a world that had seen much turmoil. The elders in our village remembered the days before Akbar's reign, times of war and uncertainty, when different kings battled for the throne of Delhi and Agra. An old farmer, Kashi Ram, loved to recall how, when he was a child, soldiers of the Sur dynasty came galloping through these very fields, raiding granaries and conscripting young men. Those were lawless times, he would say, shaking his head. A man slept with a dagger under his pillow and still woke up fearing for his life. But then Babur's line prevailed, and Akbar became Badshah, emperor. Over the years of Akbar's rule, peace had gradually returned even to far-flung villages like ours. Bandits still lurked in the wilds, but the main roads were safer, and the imperial tax collectors, though strict, protected the villagers from rogue warlords, who used to extort whatever they pleased. One breezy afternoon, I sat under the shade of a banyan tree with a group of village men after a long day's harvest. As we sipped cool water from earthen pots, the talk turned, as it often did, to the emperor. The village headman, Chaudhary Laxman, was literate, and sometimes received news from the city. He cleared his throat and announced, "It's said that in the capital, Emperor Akbar holds a great audience every day, where even the poorest can seek justice." A potter named Nihal, his hands still stained with clay, chuckled skeptically. "Justice? For the poor? Maybe if one of us traveled all the way to Agra or Sikri, we'd be old and gray before being allowed near the emperor." A few people laughed quietly, but the headman frowned. "No, it's true," insisted Laxman. "I met a merchant last month who had been to Agra. He said anyone can stand outside the palace at dawn, and if they have a petition, the emperor might hear it directly in the diwan I am." My ears perked up at this. "What does the emperor do if someone has a complaint?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. The headman smiled at me. "He listens. Sometimes he solves disputes on the spot. People say Akbar is fair-minded, that he doesn't favor the rich over the poor in matters of justice." "Ha!" snorted old Kashi Ram, who could be cynical. "Easy to be fair when sitting on a mountain of gold. What about the taxes we pay? Fair or not, we pay plenty." He gestured at the sacks of grain that had been set aside as the imperial share from the harvest. A portion of everyone's crop went to the emperor's treasury. My father, who was among the group, gave Kashi Ram a stern look. "Careful, old man. The emperor's tax may be heavy, but at least he uses it to maintain order. We haven't seen war in our part since his rule began. That is worth something." Another villager piped up. "I heard the emperor even forgave the tax 1 year after a bad drought. His men brought food for starving villages in the north." That's true, the headman affirmed. Akbar has a reputation for kindness as well as strength. Didn't he abolish that hated pilgrim tax? The mullah from the next town was talking about it last spring, how Akbar removed the tax on non-Muslims visiting holy sites. A wise move. It made many people happy. There were nods around the circle. Our village was mostly Hindu, but we knew Akbar was a Muslim ruler. The older generation had been unsure of him at first, recalling previous emperors who were less accommodating, but over time people came to respect that Akbar treated all faiths with a fair hand. My mother, I recall, particularly admired Akbar's senior queen, Maryam-uz-Zamani, whom we simply called Joda Bai, as rumor had it that was her original name. She was a Rajput princess married to Akbar, and news of this had traveled far. To the women in our village, Joda Bai's presence in the palace was a source of pride, one of our own in the highest seat of the land. The emperor listens to her counsel, they say. My mother once whispered while braiding my sister's hair. That must be why he's so kind to Hindu people. She has taught him our ways. Whether or not that was true, it comforted my mother to think the empire's decisions might be influenced by a woman who worshipped the same gods as us. Even as we respected Akbar, there was also a healthy dose of fear. We knew well that defying the emperor or breaking his laws could bring dire consequences. Travelers through our village occasionally carried frightening tales. Once, a wandering sadhu came by and, over a meal we offered, told a grim story of a corrupt official in a distant province who was caught cheating the treasury. According to the sadhu, Akbar had the man sewn up in a raw cowhide and left in the sun as punishment. We shuddered at that thought. A nasty way to go, as the hide would shrink and crush the life out of the offender. It might have been just a rumor, but it reminded us that the emperor's justice could be severe. And of course, we had heard about the emperor's elephant. That story stuck in our minds more than any other. Around winter fires, when nights were long, someone would invariably bring it up. They say Akbar keeps a giant elephant just to stomp criminals to death. Some of the men dismissed it as exaggeration. Why would the emperor bother with that, they'd argue. A sword or noose would do the job faster. Others, like my friend Raju's grandfather, swore it was true. I saw it with my own eyes in Agra, the old man claimed one night, causing everyone to lean in closer. He described an elephant execution in gory detail, though in hindsight I suspect he embellished to thrill us kids. The beast lifted the criminal high with its trunk, then dashed him to the ground and trampled him until he was just a smear on the earth. He croaked, making squishing motions with his hands for emphasis. We children listened, equal parts horrified and delighted to be so scared. The adults often told him to hush, saying he'd give us nightmares. They were right. On those nights I certainly dreamed of enormous feet looming over me. Still, despite the fright those tales gave me, they also sparked something else in my young heart. An intense curiosity. The world beyond our village, where emperors and elephants shaped fate, called out to me. I yearned to see it for myself. The palaces, the bustling cities, the legendary emperor who mingled with commoners and bent wild beasts to his will. I especially could not shake the image of that elephant of justice. Was Hiran truly as monstrous and miraculous as they said? Did the emperor really trust an animal to deliver judgments? These questions grew in me like vines, slowly pushing aside the comfortable walls of my village life. As I entered my late teens, I found myself dreaming more often of traveling to the imperial capital. I would pause while tilling the field, imagining distant Agra with its fortress, or Fatehpur Sikri, which people spoke of as a newly built wonder city of red stone. Not everyone understood my fascination. One evening, after the chores were done, I broached the subject with my father. He was repairing one of his ox carts under the neem tree in our courtyard as I hovered nearby. Summoning courage, I said, "Bapu, do you ever think of visiting the emperor's city?" My father looked up, surprised by the question. He was a sturdy man with sun-leathered skin and kind eyes, content with the life of a farmer. "What would I do there, Arjun?" he asked, using my name softly. "Our work and home are here. The city is no place for us." I fiddled with a loose thread on my tunic. "I know, but I want to see it. The emperor's court, the bazaars, the great mosques and temples. I want to hear music in the palace and watch the soldiers drill. Don't you wonder what it's like?" He smiled a little, shaking his head. "When I was your age, perhaps I had such dreams, but then life taught me to be content. The grain we grow, the roof over our heads, the family around us, that's what matters. Grand palaces won't fill your stomach, son." I pressed on, my voice earnest. "It's not just about palaces. I feel something pulling me, as if I'm meant to see more. What if I could find work there, earn more silver for our family than a poor harvest ever yields? I could send money back to you and Ma." At this, my father paused his work. He could tell I was serious. We were not destitute, but like most farmers, we scraped by. A bad monsoon or a swarm of locusts could mean lean times. The idea of extra income had to appeal to him. However, worry creased his brow. "I've heard those cities chew up country boys and spit them out. It's easy to fall into trouble there, Arjun. And you know no one there, have no kin in Sikri or Agra." My mother had joined us quietly, drawn by our raised voices. She laid a gentle hand on my shoulder. "What trouble are you trying to leap into now, she chided softly, though her eyes were anxious. I realized this was not just about money or adventure. They feared for my safety, their son in an unknown world. "I can take care of myself," I replied, perhaps a bit defensively. "I'm not a child anymore. Besides, we know the trading caravan that goes every few months to Agra. I could travel with them for safety. And there's Bhola Chacha in Agra. He runs a dhaba, a food stall there. He told me last year I should visit, even offered me a place to stay for a few nights if I ever came." My mother sighed. She sat down on the edge of the cart, pulling me to sit next to her. "Beta, the city shines, but it has shadows too. We've heard stories. If you fell sick or got robbed, we'd be so far away, unable to help you. Why not be content here? We are together. We have our land." For a moment, guilt stabbed at me. What right had I to seek more than the honest life my parents had given me? But that yearning inside would not quiet. "I would never abandon you," I said earnestly. "Think of it as me going to learn and earn. I'll come back, or you can come join me if life is good there. I have to see it, Ma. The Emperor's court, his elephant, everything I've only heard about. If I don't go, I'll always wonder." My father exchanged a long glance with my mother. It was as if they spoke without words, weighing the fear of letting their son go against the hope of a better future for me. Finally, my father rubbed a hand over his face and gave a reluctant nod. "We won't stand in your way, Arjun. When the next caravan passes, you may go with our blessing, but promise us you will be careful. Remember who you are and where you come from." Relief and excitement flooded me. I hugged them both tightly. "I promise, Bapu. I'll make you proud." My mother wiped a tear and managed a smile. "At least take some mathri. Biscuits I'll make for the journey, and give one to Bola Chacha from me," she said, ever the mother. So it was decided. The next month, when the trading caravan rolled through carrying textiles and spices to Agra's markets, I joined as a helping hand, tending the oxen in exchange for passage. My village gathered to see me off on the morning of departure. My sister pressed a lucky charm into my palm, a tiny wooden elephant she had carved, perhaps symbolically, though I don't think she realized the resonance. "So you don't forget us," she said with a grin that was half tears. "We expect letters with your tales," Raju, my childhood friend, demanded. "And if you see the emperor, tell him we said thank you for the good harvest this year." Another friend joked, "Yes, and please ask him to send that elephant of his down here to scare off the monkeys raiding our mango trees." A ripple of laughter went around. Even in farewell, humor lightened our hearts. I left my village with a mix of sorrow and excitement swirling within me. As the caravan creaked along the dirt road, I looked back at the cluster of mud-walled houses with thatched roofs, my entire world until then, growing smaller and smaller. My parents stood by the old banyan tree, watching until I was out of sight. I swallowed a lump in my throat and faced forward. Ahead lay the unknown. The journey to Fatehpur Sikri took many days. We traveled from dawn until dusk, stopping at sarais, travel inns, or camping under the stars. By the time we neared the imperial city, I had seen landscapes far beyond my village horizon. Rolling hills, dense teak forests, bustling market towns alive with languages and faces I'd never encountered. All along the way, people spoke of Akbar and his capital with reverence. "You'll see," an elderly trader told me on the road. "Akbar's city is like something out of a storybook. He built it from nothing on a hill, with palaces so beautiful they'll hurt your eyes." When at last I arrived, Fatehpur Sikri did not disappoint. The caravan crested a ridge at sunrise, and there it was. The imperial city sprawled out below like a painting. The morning light set the sandstone buildings aglow in hues of rose and honey. Dominating the skyline was a grand mosque with a massive gateway arch, and near it the imperial palaces, courtyards, and gardens fanned out in perfect geometry. Thin plumes of smoke from cooking fires rose here and there, and even at dawn I could hear the faint sounds of a city stirring, 1,000 voices, the clang of a blacksmith at his forge, a distant trumpet that might have been an elephant's call. My heart soared at the sight. I whispered a prayer of thanks for my safe journey, and a prayer for what lay ahead. Settling in the city was a challenge at first. My contact, Bola Chacha, welcomed me to his roadside dhaba as promised. For a couple of weeks I slept in the back of his shop, waking early to help serve hot tea and fried breads to customers. It was hard work, but it gave me a foothold, and let me gather my wits in this overwhelming environment. Fatehpur Sikri was crowded and lively beyond anything I knew. Hawkers on every corner, camels and elephants sharing the roads with throngs of people, music from some festival or another always drifting through the air. I often felt lost and insignificant in the bustle, just one boy among the tens of thousands of imperial subjects, all busy with their own lives. Yet I never forgot why I had come. Each day, as I went about chores, I listened carefully for any news of the emperor's court. People at the Daba spoke of court happenings as gossip. A new law announced an upcoming celebration for the prince's birthday, a famous singer invited to perform before Akbar. I drank it all in. And of course, I kept an ear out for mention of Hiran, or the emperor's unique methods of justice. It didn't take long to hear whispers. One morning, a group of soldiers passing through for breakfast joked in low tones about an unlucky thief who had met Hiran's foot the previous week. My ears burned as I pretended to wipe tables nearby, absorbing every word. It became clear that the tales from my village were true. The emperor indeed used his elephant for executions. Locals here spoke of it with a mix of casual acceptance and macabre humor. "Better behave or we'll feed you to Hiran." A guard laughed as he warned a street urchin who had been caught pickpocketing a customer at our stall. The boy blanched and promptly returned the purse. The guard ruffled the boy's hair afterward, saying, "Be glad it isn't serious enough to drag you to court, lad." Everyone understood that as a half-joke, half-truth. To be taken to Akbar's court for punishment could mean a date with the elephant. I noticed something else in how people talked about Emperor Akbar here in his city. They spoke with an intimacy and admiration as if describing a father or friend. Many referred to him simply as Jahan Pana, protector of the world, or Shahensha, king of kings, with genuine affection, not just formality. Street children would salute playfully when the imperial elephant retinue passed by, calling, "Hail Jahan Pana," even though Akbar himself wasn't present. The very symbol of his authority commanded that respect. One evening at the Daba, a weary traveler entertained us with a tale of how Akbar had once ridden a rampaging elephant to save lives. My ears perked up. This was the story of Akbar and the elephant Hawaii. It was on the banks of the Yamuna River near Agra, the traveler narrated, eyes shining. A crazed elephant named Hawaii broke loose and started charging through the camp, destroying everything in its path. No one could get close to it. So what does Emperor Akbar do? He leaps onto Hawaii's back. Gasps and exclamations rose around the little circle of listeners, myself included. "Yes, onto the wild beast's back," he continued, and clings for dear life as Hawaii charges across a bridge of boats on the river. The boats were smashing under the elephant's weight, water splashing everywhere. Everyone thought the emperor would be thrown off and killed. But Akbar held on. He managed to calm Hawaii after the elephant tired itself out on the far bank. From that day on, they say, no elephant ever scared Akbar again. He had shown even nature's giant who was master. I marveled at this story. To think of the emperor as a young man performing such a stunt. The awe in the traveler's voice was mirrored by those around him. "What a fearless ruler we serve," someone commented. Another chimed in proudly. "That's why the elephants in his stables behave. They know the emperor himself isn't afraid to face them." Hearing that, I felt a surge of pride. Even though I had no direct part in it, Akbar was my emperor too, after all, and such tales made me proud to be one of his subjects. It also made me even more eager to witness his court firsthand. I had been in the city nearly a month by then, but I had not yet set foot inside the palace precincts. I was preparing to seek some small job there, or at least attend a public audience when fortune intervened. One of Bola Chacha's regular customers was a middle-aged man named Karim, who worked as a stable hand in the royal stables, which included the elephants. When he learned I was seeking work, he mentioned that the palace was always in need of extra hands for various tasks. He even offered to vouch for me if I wanted a position helping care for the animals or doing general upkeep. I could hardly contain my excitement. To work in the palace, even in the humblest capacity, meant a chance to be close to everything I wanted to see. Within a week, thanks to Karim's introduction, I was hired on as a stable helper. I hauled water and fodder for the horses and elephants, cleaned out stalls, and occasionally ran errands for the mahouts and other staff. It was laborious, dirty work, but I loved it because it brought me inside the palace grounds each day. I could roam the outskirts of the courtyards, glimpse the nobility strolling by, hear the echoes of music practice from the musicians' quarter, and smell the fragrant rose attar that perfumed the emperor's gardens. Most importantly, I soon had direct encounters with Hiran and the other imperial elephants. Hiran was kept in a special enclosure with a heavy chain long enough to let him move around a bit, but short enough to restrain him. I remember the first time I approached that enclosure's fence carrying a bundle of sugarcane in my arms. Hiran stood there munching on some grass, his painted markings faded from the day before, swaying gently. I was both excited and terrified to be so near him without a crowd between us. Sensing my presence, or more likely smelling the sugarcane, Hiran turned his massive head my way. For a second I froze, meeting the gaze of that legendary beast. His eyes seemed calm, almost curious. The mahout supervising me barked, "Don't just stand there gawking, boy. Step forward slowly and offer him the cane." Heart thumping, I did as instructed. I stepped up to the fence and extended one stalk of sugarcane through the gap. Hiran's trunk uncurled like a snake and gently plucked the cane from my hand. The trunk's tip was surprisingly dexterous, almost like a hand without fingers. He tossed the stalk into his mouth and snapped it in two with a crunch. I couldn't help but grin. In that moment, feeding this creature I had feared and idolized from afar, I felt a connection, however small, to him. Hiran's mahout, an older man named Ghulam, patted the elephant's side affectionately. "He likes his treats, don't you, you greedy one?" he cooed to Hiran. Then to me he said, "Respect him, lad, and he'll be gentle. But never forget what he's capable of." He motioned for me to toss the rest of the sugar cane near Hiran's feet, which I did. "I've seen you around. You're the new helper, From the way you stare, I can tell you've heard of our Hiran's reputation." I nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Everyone in my village knew of him even before I came. It's an honor to meet him." I realized I was talking as if to a person and felt a bit silly, but Ghulam smiled. "Ah, he's famous in many villages, I'm sure. Just pray you always stay on his good side." With that, the mahout shuffled off to attend another elephant, leaving me by the fence. I stood there a minute longer, watching Hiran devour his canes, swishing his tail contentedly. who would imagine this same placid giant was also an executioner? It was a strange duality. In the stable, he was just an animal, eating, resting, flapping his ears to shoo flies. In the court, he became something almost mythical, an arbiter of life and death. Soon enough, I got the chance to see that fearsome side of Hiram in action, as I described earlier. Only a couple of weeks after I started working in the palace, the bandit's execution occurred, which I managed to witness. It left an indelible mark on me, as you know. Now, having painted a picture of my village origins and how I came to be in Akbar's world, let me return to the events that unfolded before my eyes. The stories I am about to tell are those of several individuals and how their fates entwined with Hiran's judgment. The first of these is a tale of greed and punishment. The story of a merchant whose ambition led him to the foot of the emperor's elephant. It was a bright morning in late spring when the merchant's fate unfolded before the elephant of justice. By then, I had been at Fatehpur Sikri for many months and had grown accustomed to the rhythms of court life. Still, whenever word spread that a major trial or punishment was to take place in the Diwan I Am, a ripple of excitement and dread coursed through the palace staff. On this particular day, whispers flew that a wealthy merchant was to be tried before the emperor himself on charges of theft. Many servants and townsfolk slipped away from their duties to witness the spectacle. I, too, found a spot amidst the throng gathered under the arcades of the audience hall, curious and uneasy about what would happen. The merchant in question was well known in the city bazaars, a man named Haridas. I had seen him once or twice from afar in the market, a portly fellow with a neatly trimmed beard and rings on every finger, strolling under a parasol carried by an attendant. He dealt in precious goods, spices, silks, and jewels from distant lands. Rumor had it he was fabulously rich, richer even than some minor nobles. It was hard to imagine such a man committing a crime like common thieves. But, as I learned, greed makes strange beasts of men. The emperor took his seat as usual on the marble dais, flanked by a few advisers including Raja Birbal and the finance minister, Raja Todar Mal, whom I recognized by his stern visage. Todar Mal was famed as the official who oversaw imperial revenues. The presence of the finance minister hinted that this case had to do with money or taxes, which made sense for a merchant's trial. Akbar looked calm, but I sensed tension in the air around him. He sat upright, hands resting on his knees, eyes narrowed slightly. Guards brought the accused forward. Haridas the merchant was almost unrecognizable from the peacock I'd glimpsed in the bazaar. Now he appeared a broken man, his expensive turban askew, fine clothes wrinkled and damp with sweat. He had evidently been in custody for some time. His face glistened with perspiration, and he kept wringing his hands, which were free of his many rings now, likely confiscated. The Qazi stepped forth and unrolled a scroll. In a clear voice, he outlined the charges. The merchant Haridas was accused of orchestrating a grand fraud against the imperial treasury. Over the past year, he had underreported his profits and bribed a lesser official to help him avoid paying the proper taxes on his trade. Furthermore, he had swindled a trading caravan's worth of goods from a partner merchant, falsely claiming bandits stole them, when in truth he sold those goods quietly and kept the money. The evidence was damning. Account books seized from Haridas's home showed secret ledgers of his true earnings, and the official he bribed had confessed under interrogation. The charges concluded on a grave note. Haridas had stolen not only from his business partner, but also from the emperor's coffers. A murmur ran through the crowd. Tax evasion and fraud against the state were serious offenses. Peasants like me paid our grain taxes dutifully. To hear of a rich man cheating the system sparked anger even among onlookers. I felt a mix of indignation and a twinge of pity. This merchant had so much. Why risk everything for a bit more gold? But perhaps pity, because I saw him trembling and realized he stood no chance now. The evidence was plain as daylight. Emperor Akbar's voice cut through the murmurs. "Haridas," he addressed the accused directly, "you have heard the charges. What have you to say in your defense?" His tone was not loud, but it carried the authority of someone used to being answered truthfully. Haridas prostrated himself, touching his head to the floor. "Jahan Pana, O protector of the world," he began in a quavering voice. "Mercy, please. I admit I allowed some accounting errors, but I beg forgiveness. I was recently widowed and my mind was astray with grief. I did not intend to cheat the throne." I raised my eyebrows. Widowed? That seemed a convenient story. Gossip in the market said his wife was alive and quite a formidable lady at that. It sounded like a desperate lie. The emperor appeared unconvinced as well. His eyes flicked to Todarmal, the finance minister, to gauge his reaction. Todarmal spoke, voice like iron. "Your Majesty, the accused was given opportunity to explain discrepancies before. Each time, he fabricated tales and hid the truth. His books tell a different story than his tongue. If we show lenience now, it will embolden others to steal from the treasury and their fellows." Haridas lifted himself to his knees, raising his shackled hands imploringly. "I will repay it all, Shahanshah, every last coin and more. I will give double in compensation. Only spare my life, I beg you. My aged mother depends on me. She will die of sorrow if I am executed." He broke into sobs, tears spilling down his cheeks. It was a pitiful sight indeed. This man who once strutted proudly through the bazaar was reduced to groveling and crying before us. Some faces in the crowd softened at his mention of an aged mother. Even I felt a pang. He was a person, after all, with family. But others shook their heads disapprovingly. A woman behind me whispered to her neighbor, "He should have thought of his mother before lining his pockets with stolen gold." Emperor Akbar raised a hand for silence. Haridas's sobbing quieted as he peered up, hope flickering in his eyes that his pleas might be working. The emperor's face showed no anger, but it was stern and thoughtful. "You admit wrongdoing," Akbar said slowly, yet only when caught beyond doubt. "Had this not come to light, would you have felt any remorse? Or would you be counting your ill-gotten profits still?" Haridas opened his mouth, but no words came. He glanced around as if searching for a sympathetic face and found none. Finally, he bowed his head and whispered, "I was wrong, Huzur. There is no excuse." Akbar exhaled, and it seemed for a moment there was sadness in his eyes. Perhaps he took no joy in destroying a man's life, even one so guilty. We entrusted you with trade and wealth, and you repaid a trust with treachery. You not only stole from the state, but you let your partner take the blame for supposed bandits. An innocent man could have been punished for your deception had the truth not emerged. The emperor's voice grew colder. Such greed and betrayal tear at the fabric of justice and order. They cannot be tolerated. Haridas clutched at the emperor's words as though they were physical blows. "Mercy, Padisha, mercy," he whispered, despairing now. He must have realized mercy was slipping out of reach. After a heavy pause, Akbar pronounced, "Haridas, for your crimes against the crown and your fellow man, I sentence you to death. The punishment shall be carried out immediately by royal elephant, as a lesson to all who think to deceive under my rule." A collective intake of breath hissed through the assembly. I felt my heart drop. Even though I expected it, the finality of the sentence still shocked me. Haridas let out a strangled cry. "No, no, not that. Please, Majesty, anything but that. I beg you." His composure shattered completely. He flung himself prostrate again, now babbling incoherently for mercy, for the sake of his mother and ancestors and whatever came to mind. 2 guards stepped forward and firmly gripped his arms, beginning to drag him toward the cleared execution spot. I saw Birbal lean slightly toward the emperor and murmur something. Akbar gave a curt shake of his head. It seemed even Birbal's famed compassion or wit could not sway the emperor on this matter. Justice in cases of corruption was to be swift and unforgiving. As the clearing in the courtyard was formed and spectators backed away, I noticed I had again ended up not far from the flat execution stone, though at a safe distance. By now I was familiar with the grim routine, the clanging of the bell signaling Hiran's entrance, the hush as the elephant appeared. Yet this day something unexpected occurred. When Hiran lumbered into the hall, guided by Gulam, Haridas was still being dragged to the center. The merchant had lost control of himself entirely. He struggled against the guards with surprising ferocity, fueled by mortal fear. Breaking free of one guard's grip, he lurched to his feet and did the unthinkable. He ran. "Stop him!" someone shouted. But terror had lent Haridas speed. He dashed across the open floor, dodging a soldier who tried to grab him. In that moment, he looked less like a dignified merchant and more like a cornered animal, eyes bulging, hair coming loose from its tie as he sprinted. Hiran was just stepping fully into the courtyard, his trunk raised high, perhaps sensing the tension. The sudden movement of the fleeing man caught the elephant's attention. Gulam shouted a command I didn't understand and pointed, directing Hiran to intercept. The crowd gasped and scattered further back, afraid of being in the path of either the panicked merchant or the elephant in pursuit. Haridas made for one of the massive sandstone pillars at the edge of the hall, perhaps thinking he could slip away into the colonnade or hide behind it. But Hiran closed the distance in a few thundering strides. It was astonishing how fast the elephant could move when spurred. His heavy feet slapped the ground in an almost running gait, decorative bells on his anklets clanging chaotically. I pressed myself behind a column out of instinct as the chase came near. Just as Haridas reached a pillar and tried to dart behind it, Hiran was upon him. The elephant's trunk shot forward like a python striking. With a loud grunt, Hiran wrapped the trunk around the merchant's waist and yanked him backwards into the open. Haridas let out a wail, flailing helplessly as he was lifted clear off the ground. The crowd was deathly silent. Even the guards halted, stunned by the swiftness of Hiran's capture. For a brief second, Haridas dangled in the air, feet kicking. I caught sight of his face. It was contorted in sheer terror, his mouth agape in a scream that had gone silent with shock. The strength of Hiran's trunk was undeniable. It held the man as easily as one might hold a child. With a deliberate turn, Hiran hauled the merchant back toward the center of the clearing. Ghulam was expertly guiding the elephant with verbal cues and prods, ensuring Hiran returned near the execution stone. Haridas was deposited onto the hard ground, knocked breathless as he landed on his back. Immediately, 2 guards rushed in and pinned the shrieking man down, though Hiran still kept part of his trunk coiled around the merchant's legs, effectively anchoring him. What happened next made me both cringe and marvel at the coordination between man and beast. Ghulam gave a series of sharp whistles and nudges, and Hiran, understanding the command, let go of Haridas and repositioned himself. The elephant raised his right foot and hovered it menacingly above the squirming merchant. There was a heartbeat of hesitation. Hiran's foot hanging in the air, casting a large shadow over the doomed man. Haridas, realizing his escape had failed, threw his arms over his face and released one final scream of pure horror. Then Hiran's foot descended. Unlike the quick stomp he had delivered to the bandit earlier, this time Hiran pressed down more slowly, almost methodically. Perhaps the elephant was savoring the motion or simply following his training to ensure the task was done thoroughly. Haridas's scream was abruptly cut off with a ghastly crunch. I heard multiple bones shatter simultaneously, a sound that sent a shiver through every witness, myself included. A few people whimpered or turned away. I felt my own legs trembling. Hiran shifted his weight, grinding down as the guards hastily stepped back from the horrible scene. When Hiran lifted his foot away, the merchant lay still. His chest was sunken where ribs had collapsed, and blood trickled from his mouth and nose. He had been silenced forever. A collective exhale came from the crowd. Many had been holding their breath as I had. A low murmur rose, part shock, part grim acceptance. The drama of the chase had our hearts pounding, but the end was as final as could be. From his dais, Emperor Akbar surveyed the aftermath with somber eyes. He spoke, voice resonant in the hall. Let all bear witness. No wealth, no plea can save a man who betrays trust and law in this realm. Justice does not bend for riches. He then signaled the end of the proceedings. I noticed Birbal looking down, arms folded as if in contemplation, and Todar Mal with a grimly satisfied expression. The assembled audience began to disperse in subdued silence or hushed whispers. No one dared question the severity of the punishment, not publicly. In the eyes of most, it seemed a fitting end for a man who tried to use his riches to cheat the very hand that fed the empire. A few spat on the ground in the direction of Haridas's body, a final show of contempt for his greed. As was customary, attendants moved in to clean up. I saw Ghulam pat Hiran's side and feed him a piece of jaggery, raw sugar, as a reward for a successful execution. Hiran rumbled contentedly. The elephant's ears flapped, perhaps to shoo a fly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Meanwhile, The mangled remains of the merchant were wrapped in a cloth. I glimpsed one arm, limp and protruding, with bracelets still jingling on the wrist. Ironic that even in death some of his adornments clung to him. I stepped out from behind the column on unsteady feet, joining a few other servants as we made our way out of the hall. My mind was reeling from what I had just seen. If I had any lingering doubt that Emperor Akbar would truly unleash this terrible method of execution on the guilty, it was gone. Rich or poor, grand or lowly, all were equal under the elephant's foot if they transgressed the emperor's law. Haridas's demise proved that even high status offered no immunity. Yet, as I walked out into the sunlight of the courtyard, I also felt discomfort. The justice was harsh, and while it was deserved by law, witnessing it made me question the line between justice and cruelty. Haridas had been unquestionably guilty, but watching him die so brutally stirred conflicting emotions. Some part of me recoiled at how violent the punishment was, how irreversible. Perhaps that was the point, a deterrent by extreme example. I recall overhearing a snippet of conversation between two officials walking ahead of me. One said, "His Majesty is just, but oh, what a bitter end for that fool. Greed truly buried him today." The other replied, "Better one greedy man crushed than 100 follow in his footsteps. Now everyone who saw this will think twice before cheating the empire." They glanced back at Hiran, who was being led out of the hall, and one added with a wry, uneasy chuckle, "The royal tax collector has a new name, Hiran the accountant." His companion did not laugh, perhaps finding little humor in even that dark jest. That night, back in the servants' quarters, the execution was all anyone could talk about. Some of the younger grooms excitedly reenacted the chase, running around our quarters until the head steward scolded them into settling down. A cook remarked that Haridas's wealth would likely be seized by the state, and maybe some of it distributed to the poor or to his victims. Akbar often does that, you know. Uses a bad man's riches for good causes, she said. I wasn't sure if that was official policy or her hopeful thinking, but it comforted us to imagine some justice beyond mere death. I found myself quiet through most of the chatter, reflecting inwardly. In a single day, I had seen how the highest might fall when their integrity failed. The image of Hiran catching the merchant like a hunter felling prey replayed in my mind. In those moments, the elephant had indeed seemed like the embodiment of royal retribution. Inescapable, unstoppable. I remembered how in my village people believed the elephant could sense guilt. Haridas's attempt to flee certainly made him look guilty as sin, and Hiran had pursued him without hesitation. Of course, it was all at the Mahout's command. But to a common observer, it almost appeared as if Hiran took offense at the man's cowardice and chased him down out of his own judgment. This event cemented the elephant's fearsome reputation further. I overheard some palace guards later say that after this theft in the marketplaces and corruption among officials noticeably declined, at least for a while. The story of Haridas spread beyond Sikri's walls, carried by merchants and travelers to every corner of the empire. I imagined storytellers in villages like mine dramatically recounting how a greedy merchant tried to run from Emperor Akbar's elephant and was caught, his greed literally crushed. It would serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. As for me, I slept poorly that night. In my dreams, I saw coins raining from the sky, each one turning into an elephant's foot that slammed down into the earth. I saw Haridas reaching out to me, asking me to save him. But I was as frozen as the pillar he tried to hide behind. I woke with a start, the echo of crunching bones still in my ears. In the darkness of my small chamber, I whispered a prayer for the merchant's soul, despite his wrongdoing. And I prayed for wisdom for myself, to never let greed or dishonesty lead me to such an end, and wisdom for the emperor, that he might always know when to be merciful and when to be strict. Little did I know that I would soon witness an example of that very balance, when the emperor's justice would take a different turn. The next major incident involving Hiran that I saw was not one of pitiless punishment, but rather a strange dance between severity and mercy. It began with the capture of a rebel who, by all expectations, should have met the same fate as the bandit and the merchant. But fate and Akbar's mind had something else in store for him. Not long after the merchant's execution, a very different case came to test the emperor's justice. This time, it was not a criminal driven by greed or malice, but a rebel, a man who had raised arms against Akbar's rule. His name was Pratap Singh, a local chieftain from a hilly region at the empire's edge. He had refused to pay tribute and rallied a band of fighters to defy the imperial authorities. For months, reports had trickled into court about skirmishes in his territory. Several imperial officers were ambushed. Some were even killed. Pratap Singh's rebellion was small in the grand scheme of the empire, but it was a thorn that could not be ignored. Eventually, Akbar sent a detachment of his army to quell the unrest. A brief, fierce battle ensued in the hills, and Pratap Singh was captured alive. He was brought in chains to Fatehpur Sikri to face the emperor's judgment. I still remember the day they paraded Pratap Singh into the Diwani Am. Word had spread like wildfire through the palace. A rebel leader would be presented before Akbar. Everyone expected a dramatic confrontation. I managed to slip away from my duties early and secured a vantage point near the courtyard's edge. There was electricity in the air, a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Many courtiers had gathered, eager to witness how the emperor would handle a man who openly dared to challenge him. Pratap Singh was led in by 6 armored guards. He was tall and lean, his face bruised and weather-worn. Despite his shackled wrists and his defeat, the rebel's bearing was proud. He walked with head held high, unbowed. The guards forced him to his knees before the emperor's platform, but Pratap knelt stiffly, refusing to bend his head fully to the floor in the customary salam. A whisper rippled through the audience at this defiance. Some looked uneasy, others impressed by his boldness even in chains. Akbar regarded the man silently for a moment. The emperor was dressed in battle attire that day, as if to send a message. He wore a simple cotton tunic reinforced with light armor, and a curved saber hung at his side. Perhaps he had come straight from weapons practice or intentionally chose to appear martial to the rebel. His expression was unreadable. The Qazi began to read the charges: treason against the empire, incitement of armed revolt, murder of imperial officers. But before he could finish, Pratap Singh suddenly interrupted in a loud, clear voice, surprising everyone. "I need no trial. I admit what I have done." The Qazi faltered into silence. A couple of guards moved as if to strike the prisoner for speaking out of turn, but Akbar raised his hand to stop them. There was something arresting about Pratap's voice. It rang with conviction rather than shame. He lifted his chin and addressed Akbar directly. "Yes, I rebelled. I took up arms to protect my people from what I saw as unjust rule. If that is a crime worthy of death, so be it. I ask for no mercy." A stunned hush fell. One did not speak to the emperor in such a manner, certainly not to tell him his rule was unjust. I felt my heart thumping wildly. This rebel was either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. The emperor's eyes flashed, but he did not rage. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, intrigued perhaps by the man's audacity. "You accuse my rule of injustice. On what grounds?" Akbar asked evenly. There was a slight narrowing of his gaze, a dangerous glint, but he allowed the man to speak. Pratap Singh drew a breath. Despite the tension of the moment, I saw his hands, though bound, did not tremble. "Your tax collectors seized more grain than our poor harvest could spare," he declared loudly. "My village was left hungry so the imperial treasury could be full. When we protested, your officials had my brother whipped in the marketplace. That was the day I swore I would no longer bow to your throne. I did what I thought was right, fighting for the dignity of my people." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some courtiers looked embarrassed or angry at the accusation. I noticed Raja Todar Mal's face grow red. As finance minister, tax matters fell under his purview. Akbar's expression was stern, but I thought I saw a flicker of pain or regret cross it at the mention of an unjust official. The emperor was known to loathe abuses by his subordinates. He often emphasized fairness in tax collection. If what Pratap said was true, then an imperial officer had indeed failed in duty. However, no matter the cause, rebellion was a grave offense. The emperor's voice hardened. "You took justice into your own hands and spilled blood. Whatever your grievance, you compounded wrongdoing with more wrongdoing. Many innocents likely suffered in your revolt as well." Pratap Singh pressed his lips together. "War is cruel, yes, but we counted the cost and found living under the heel of corruption more cruel. If my death will stop the suffering of my people, I gladly give my life." This was heady, dramatic stuff, like something out of an epic poem. I felt an involuntary admiration for the rebel's courage, even as I knew he had broken the law. There was a strange tension in my chest. Part of me expected Akbar to explode in anger, to order him executed on the spot for such insolence. But Emperor Akbar did not explode. Instead, he slowly stood from his seat and descended the few steps of his dais, something he rarely did in open court. Facing Pratap at closer range now, Akbar spoke loud enough for all to hear. "You claim to die for your people. Very well. Die you shall." There was a collective intake of breath. "But it will not be swift." The emperor's eyes bore into the kneeling rebel. "I will give you 5 days to consider your actions and feel the weight of imperial justice. Each day you will face my elephant. And each day, if you ask for mercy and pledge loyalty, this ordeal will end. If not..." He let the implication hang in the air. The crowd was silent in astonishment. This was highly unusual. Many probably expected Akbar to sentence the rebel to death by elephant immediately, just as he had done with criminals before. But this drawn-out ordeal, what did it mean? Was it punishment or a twisted form of clemency, offering a chance to repent? We all looked at each other, unsure. Pratap Singh himself looked momentarily uncertain, as if this was a fate he had not anticipated. Then his features steeled. "I will not beg," he said hoarsely, still defiant, though I saw a glint of fear in his eyes now. Akbar regarded him for a moment, then nodded to the guards. "Take him to the training courtyard," he commanded sharply. "Bring Hiran." A shiver ran through me. The training courtyard was a more secluded area used for drilling soldiers and exercising elephants, not typically where executions were held. Perhaps the emperor wanted this spectacle away from the eyes of the general public in the Diwan-i-Am. Yet enough of an audience, courtiers and palace staff, would still witness it. I quickly followed the crowd that was now moving en masse to that courtyard, which lay just beyond the main audience hall. The training yard was a broad, open space of packed earth, enclosed by high walls on 3 sides and a colonnade on the 4th where people could stand to watch. Some archery targets and dummies had been hastily cleared away to make room. I managed to slip into the colonnade along with a throng of courtiers, soldiers, servants, and others who had rushed to see this extraordinary event. We lined the edges of the yard, leaving the center bare. Guards chained Pratap Singh to a stout wooden post set in the ground at the middle of the yard, giving him only a yard or 2 of slack. He had limited room to move, but could not flee. I could see him testing the chains. They rattled, but held firm. He was breathing fast, chest heaving from a mix of exertion and adrenaline, but he still stood upright. From my vantage, perhaps 20 paces away, I had a clear view of his face. He looked determined, jaw clenched, though the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes betrayed that he understood the peril he was in. Emperor Akbar arrived and took a position at the front of the colonnade, arms crossed. The usual formality of the court was loosened in this chaotic relocation. The emperor stood at the same level as others, though a respectful circle of space was maintained around him by his guards, rather than on a throne. In the hush that fell, the distant jingle and thud of Hiran's approach could be heard. Moments later, Hiran entered through a large gate at the far end of the courtyard, guided by Ghulam. The elephant's appearance was met with gasps from those who had perhaps never been so close to him. Here in the confined courtyard, Hiran's presence felt even more immense and intimidating. He wore no ceremonial paint today, only his bare gray hide and the chain and bells on his ankles that jingled with each step. Pratap Singh could see Hiran now. To his credit, the man did not scream or collapse. I saw him plant his feet firmly and lift his chin, though his eyes widened at the sheer size of the beast coming toward him. His hands, bound in chains, balled into fists. Emperor Akbar raised his voice so both Pratap and the crowd could hear. "Last chance, Pratap Singh. Acknowledge me as your sovereign and beg for pardon, and I shall grant it. Persist in your rebellion, and Hiran will begin your punishment." Every ear strained for the rebel's response. Pratap was breathing raggedly. The dust on his face was streaked with sweat and blood from earlier scuffles. For a moment, I thought I saw moisture in his eyes, but if it was there, he blinked it away. He straightened as much as his bonds allowed and shouted back, voice cracking only slightly. "I will bow to no false king. Do what you will." A collective exhale, some mutters of disbelief. Emperor Akbar's face hardened, and he made a sharp gesture to Ghulam. The Mahout issued a command and prodded Hiran forward. I watched with heart in throat as the massive elephant closed the gap between himself and the chained rebel looming over Pratap. From where I stood, it was an almost surreal sight. The tall man and the even taller elephant, like David and Goliath, except David had no sling, and Goliath was under the command of a king. Pratap tried to brace himself. At first, Hiran simply nudged him with the tip of his trunk, as if examining this curious object. The rebel swatted at the trunk reflexively, which drew some gasps and even a few chuckles from soldiers nearby. Imagine trying to fight an elephant with bare hands. Hiran responded to the swat by curling his trunk swiftly around Pratap's torso. A collective gasp went up. Even from a distance I could see Pratap's ribs constrict as the muscular trunk squeezed. He grimaced, finally silent, his air likely cut off. Then, with a powerful jerk, Hiran lifted Pratap Singh a few feet off the ground and flung him down. The man hit the earth hard, landing on his side. A cry of pain escaped him. Dust flew up around where he crashed. I winced, as did many others. That alone could have broken bones. I wasn't sure. Pratap tried to scramble up, but his chains limited his movement and the wind seemed knocked out of him. Hiran wasn't done. Following his training, the elephant began what I can only describe as a calculated, rough handling. He used his trunk and head to shove the rebel around, never quite delivering a fatal blow, but certainly inflicting pain. At one point, Hiran pinned Pratap against the ground with a foot on the man's thigh. I heard Pratap let out a scream as the weight likely cracked the bone or came close. Mercifully, Hiran shifted off before it fully crushed the limb. Again, likely per command from Ghulam. This terrifying ordeal lasted only a minute or two, but it felt far longer. Spectators watched with mixed expressions. Some were pale and horrified, others looked grimly satisfied to see the proud rebel finally screaming. I admit I had to look away for a heartbeat when I saw Hiran's foot press onto Pratap's leg. I feared it would sever it entirely. When I looked back, Pratap was writhing and gasping in the dirt, clutching his leg, which lay at an odd angle. Perhaps a bone had indeed cracked. One of his arms was also limp, dislocated from the throw, maybe. Emperor Akbar raised his hand sharply, and Ghulam immediately signaled Hiran to step back. The elephant obeyed, retreating a couple of paces and standing calmly as if nothing had happened. The rebel lay moaning, unable to rise due to his injuries and chains. A hush fell. All eyes turned to Akbar. The emperor stepped forward from the colonnade just at the edge of the yard. "I do not enjoy your suffering," he announced, voice carrying but measured. "But let it be known, rebellion against just rule leads only to misery, for the rebel and for those he misleads. Pratap Singh, you have felt the strength of the empire. Will you now acknowledge me as your emperor and beg forgiveness?" Every witness listened intently for the rebel's reply. Pratap was breathing raggedly. The dust on his face was now mixed with the tears of pain. For a moment I thought he had fainted, but he stirred, propping himself weakly on one elbow. His whole body trembled. He looked utterly broken physically. Yet, through bloodied lips, I heard him croak, Never." It was barely a whisper, but in the silence many heard it. A stunned jolt went through me. The man's spirit was iron, even if his body was shattered. I saw Akbar's eyes widen slightly. Perhaps even he hadn't expected such stubborn defiance after that torture. Akbar's jaw clenched. "Then you will meet Hiran again tomorrow," he declared. He turned on his heel and, without another glance at the fallen rebel, walked away. The assembly seemed to collectively remember to breathe and moved aside as the emperor departed. Soldiers hurried to attend Pratap Singh, detaching his chains from the post and dragging him away, presumably back to a cell to await the morrow. That night, the palace was abuzz with discussion. Never had we seen such a protracted form of imperial punishment. Some thought Akbar was being unnecessarily cruel, essentially torturing the man when a swift execution would do. Others argued the emperor was showing admirable patience by giving the rebel multiple chances to repent and live. A few pragmatists noted that keeping the rebel alive for now could help Akbar identify other co-conspirators or encourage the remaining rebel fighters to surrender, knowing their leader hadn't been killed outright. I personally wrestled with what I felt. Watching Pratap Singh's torment had been harrowing. Part of me felt the emperor's approach was cruel, stretching the man's suffering over days, but another part recognized a strange wisdom in it. Akbar seemed determined to break the rebel's will, yes, but also to offer him redemption. Each day was an opportunity for Pratap to choose life and loyalty over prideful death. Perhaps Akbar respected the man's courage and wanted to save him, if only he would bend. It was like trying to tame a wild stallion rather than shoot it outright. Harsh, but with the hope of a useful outcome. On the second day, a crowd gathered again in the training courtyard at the appointed time. Emperor Akbar came as well, punctual and composed. I suspect even more people attended on the second day, word having spread further about the extraordinary spectacle. I saw many common citizens among the edges of the yard, not just palace personnel. Clearly, news had gotten out to the public. They stood on tiptoes or climbed low walls to get a view. Pratap Singh was brought out once more, his injuries from the previous day obvious. His left leg was splinted crudely, and he limped heavily, supported by 2 guards as they half-carried him to the post. One arm was in a sling. Bruises marred his skin. Yet, even in this state, when he was chained to the post again, he managed to stand on his one good leg, refusing to kneel or slump. It was an agonizing sight. I could see sweat beading on his forehead from the effort and pain of holding himself upright. The emperor stepped forward. "Pratap Singh," he announced, tone less formal and more personal now. "You are a brave man. Do not let that bravery become your downfall. Yesterday you experienced my elephant's strength. Spare yourself and your people further pain. Swear loyalty to me, and I shall end this." A hush fell over all. All eyes turned to the battered rebel. Even Hiran, waiting nearby, seemed to pause in a strangely expectant way, ears cocked slightly forward. The rebel's chest heaved. He looked utterly exhausted. His lips moved, and for a moment no sound came out. A guard stepped up to wipe the blood from his mouth. Perhaps his throat was too dry. Finally, in a strained voice, Pratap Singh spoke. "My people, Remember your men's whips. How can I call you sovereign? Each phrase came out between pained breaths. Emperor Akbar's face tightened. In a quieter voice, tinged with irritation, he responded, "If I were truly the tyrant you imagine, you would already be dead. I invest this effort because I would rather have a living friend than a martyred enemy. But if you insist on the latter—" He gestured again. Once more, Ghulam directed Hiram forward. "I will not recount every detail of the second day's punishment. Suffice it to say it was a brutal reprise of the first." This time the emperor, perhaps angered by Pratap's continued resistance, allowed Hiran a bit more latitude. The elephant delivered a painful nudge to Pratap's midsection with one of his tusks. Blunt though they were capped, it still likely cracked a rib or two. He then lifted the rebel again and pushed him hard against the post. I could hear the dull thud from where I stood. Pratap's scream echoed off the walls as something in his injured arm gave way and he sagged. Through it all, Emperor Akbar watched intently, arms folded, face grim but set. After Hiram stepped back on the second day, Pratap Singh hung limply from his chains, semi-conscious. When asked again if he would yield, he made no reply except a faint groan. The emperor ordered him untied and carried off to be cared for until the next day. There were whispers among some spectators that perhaps Pratap would not even survive the night with such injuries. Yet day 3 came, and miraculously the rebel clung to life. He was carried out on a litter this time, as he could no longer walk at all. The guards propped him up against the stake and reattached the chains more for formality than necessity, as he had little strength to move regardless. Each day by now had become a macabre ritual, the emperor offering mercy, the rebel refusing, the elephant inflicting its punishment. By day 3, a somber mood hung over the gathering. Many present looked uneasy, their initial thrill replaced by pity or dread. It's one thing to execute a man swiftly, another to watch him broken bit by bit. Some courtiers murmured that the rebel's stubborn spirit was nigh supernatural to endure so far. That third day, when Akbar asked Pratap softly, almost gently, to just nod or raise a hand if he accepted allegiance, the rebel, through swollen eyes, still managed to rasp, "I cannot." It was barely audible. Akbar's lips tightened into a thin line. He seemed genuinely frustrated, and perhaps a touch desperate. This had gone further than anyone anticipated. With a sigh, he motioned for Hiran once more. Hiram dutifully performed his role, but I sensed even the elephant was growing puzzled by this routine. He would trumpet and shuffle as commanded, grasp the near-lifeless man and toss or push him. Pratap barely even screamed by that point. His voice had given out, and he could only gasp or cough weakly with each new injury. After Hiram stepped back on day 3, Pratap Singh lay crumpled, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. When asked again if he would yield, he made no response. I doubt he could even hear by then. The emperor ordered him taken to the physicians to ensure he would survive the night for the next trial. A sign, perhaps, that Akbar did not truly wish the man to die yet, not without giving him every chance. By now, I felt emotionally drained by the whole affair. That night, I overheard an extraordinary conversation while serving water in the servants' hall. 2 of Akbar's senior courtiers, including Birbal, were speaking quietly. They did not notice me in the shadows. Birbal sounded troubled. Jahanpana is wrestling with his own conscience as much as with that rebel. I fear this will haunt him, whatever the outcome. The other replied, He could have ended it today. Why prolong it further? The man can hardly speak. This is more mercy than anyone deserves, or more cruelty, depending on one's view. Birbal sighed. Akbar sees something of value in Pratap Singh. Perhaps a mirror of his own younger spirit, the fire that would not yield. He wants to tame it, not extinguish it. But pride is a tyrant in its own right. I crept away, their words swirling in my head. Perhaps Birbal was right. Perhaps the emperor sensed a kindred spirit in this rebel's passion and resolve, even if misdirected, and thus hesitated to destroy him outright. The fourth day dawned. I suspect by now the entire court, perhaps even Akbar, thought it would be the final day. Pratap Singh's body surely could not endure beyond that, and everyone's nerves were frayed by the prolonged spectacle. The crowd that gathered was solemn, quieter. Even those who initially bayed for the rebel's blood now looked on him with pity and respect for his endurance. When Pratap was brought out on day 4, many could hardly bear to look. His body was wrapped in bandages and splints, his face gaunt and sunken. He was conscious, but barely. Emperor Akbar himself looked grave and tired. Perhaps he had not slept well, his mind burdened by this unresolved trial of wills. Perhaps he had decided it would end that day, one way or another. The guards did not bother chaining Pratap upright to the post this time. They laid him on the ground on a quilt, propping him slightly so he could see the emperor. He could not even kneel now. His chest heaved with each labored breath. One of the physicians hovered nearby in case he expired then and there. Emperor Akbar approached the rebel, and, to the surprise of all, knelt down beside him in the dirt. You could hear a pin drop. Some gasped softly. The Emperor of Hindustan kneeling on the ground next to a shackled rebel. Akbar spoke to Pratap in a low voice that those nearest strained to hear. I caught snatches. Why do you force my hand so? You have courage, and perhaps honor. I would rather have you live. It sounded less like a monarch addressing a criminal, and more like one man pleading with another. Pratap Singh's eyes, swollen but still lucid, looked at the emperor. Perhaps in Akbar's face he saw genuine regret or admiration. We who watched could only imagine what passed between them in that hushed moment. Some say Pratap's eyes welled with tears and he whispered something faint. Later, some claimed he said, I have nothing left but my pride. Take it, and I am nothing. Others believe he murmured a prayer. Whatever it was, Akbar listened intently. Then Akbar placed a hand gently on Pratap's forehead, a gesture almost of blessing, and rose to his feet. Turning to the gathered court, Akbar raised his voice, firm yet touched with emotion. Pratap Singh has shown a spirit none can deny. He fought for what he believed in. Though he wronged the empire, he has suffered greatly for it. If he now acknowledges his emperor, then the emperor shall acknowledge his courage. He took a deep breath. I declare that Pratap Singh is pardoned. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. It was as if the entire courtyard was frozen in collective disbelief. Then a wave of murmurs, gasps, and even sighs of relief coursed through the crowd. Some of the courtiers broke into spontaneous applause at the emperor's decision. others looked stunned. I found that I had tears on my cheeks and I wasn't sure when they had begun. Emperor Akbar continued, raising a hand for quiet again. This man shall live. Let his life from this day forward stand as proof of the empire's justice and mercy. He will be cared for until he recovers, and then he will serve in our ranks, that his bravery may strengthen the empire rather than tear it. Despite his broken body, Pratap Singh must have understood those words. I saw him turn his head slightly toward Akbar and mouth something soundlessly, perhaps a word of thanks, perhaps a vow. His eyes closed, and his body went limp as if finally surrendering to exhaustion, or as if at peace. A cheer actually went up among some of the onlookers, perhaps more out of sheer emotional release than joy. Many were simply relieved the agonies were over. I felt a knot in my chest unwind. Against all expectation, this rebel who had defied the might of Akbar and survived 5 encounters with Hiran was going to live. In my heart, I silently thanked the emperor for his mercy. Hiran, who had stood by awaiting yet another command, seemed to sense that his part was done. He gave a low rumble and stamped once, as if in affirmation. Perhaps it's fanciful, but I dare say even Hiran looked pleased that the ordeal ended with life, not death this time. Courtiers rushed forward to see to Pratap Singh. The royal physicians and attendants carried him off on a stretcher to tend his many wounds. Emperor Akbar watched them go, then gently patted Hiran's side. I could see a faint, weary smile on the emperor's lips as he stroked the elephant's trunk. Perhaps a silent thanks to Hiran for carrying out his difficult orders these past days. I realized then that Akbar had not been punishing the rebel alone. He had been testing himself, wrestling with how far to push punishment before mercy should intervene. The palace buzzed with the news that Pratap Singh had been spared. Some were critical, saying Akbar had shown too much leniency to a traitor. But most praised the emperor's wisdom and humanity. As one noble remarked later that day, Akbar proved today he truly is Akbar the Great. Only a great ruler knows when to sheathe the sword and extend a hand. Even many who had loathed the rebel found themselves respecting him, and more so respecting Akbar for forgiving him. As for Pratap Singh, he did recover slowly over months. The emperor kept his word. Pratap was given a role as a local governor in his home region once he was fit to travel, and, true to his promise, Akbar addressed the grievances that had sparked the rebellion. The corrupt taxmen were punished, and relief was sent to the villages that had suffered. In time, people said, Pratap Singh governed loyally and justly under Akbar's banner until the end of his days. A remarkable turnaround from rebel to administrator, a living testament to the power of mercy. Reflecting on those 5 days, I came to appreciate how multifaceted justice can be. I had seen raw retribution with the bandit and the merchant. Now I saw the limits of cruelty and the triumph of compassion. Emperor Akbar's choice to spare Pratap taught me that while justice may begin with vengeance, it finds its completion in forgiveness. A ruler's greatness lies not just in the punishments he metes out, but in the mercies he grants. That evening of the 5th day, I tended to Hiran in the stables as usual, brushing him down under the fading light. He was calm, munching on fodder, as if the past days had been nothing out of the ordinary. I rested my hand on his massive shoulder and spoke softly. "You did well, my friend." Hiran slowly blinked his small eyes and curled his trunk around my waist in a gentle, almost affectionate hug before letting go. I chuckled, surprised by the gesture. In that quiet moment, I felt as if even this great elephant understood that something significant had happened, that we had all been part of a painful trial that ultimately affirmed life over death. The tale of Pratap Singh's ordeal and pardon spread far beyond the court. It became legend in its own right. I heard that in distant provinces, people spoke of the rebel who faced the emperor's elephant and lived, some attributing it to Akbar's benevolence, others to divine intervention. For me, who saw it up close, it was a lesson in the emperor's philosophy, that justice could be fearsome, but in the end it was guided by a deep sense of humanity. The following year was relatively uneventful in the capital. Hiran continued to appear in the Diwan-i-Am for occasional executions, but none were particularly notable. I carried on my work, my heart a mix of contentment and vigilance. By now, I felt I had seen it all when it came to Hiran's judgments. But fate had one more lesson in store for me. An incident unlike any other, where the very nature of justice itself was called into question by the most unexpected of events. It was a day when Hiran, the great dispenser of imperial justice, would make everyone wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, there was a higher power at play in those moments of life and death. The final tale I witnessed at Akbar's court was in some ways the most mysterious and thought-provoking of all. By this time, I had seen Hiran carry out the emperor's justice on multiple occasions, sometimes with merciless finality, sometimes with a measure of mercy dictated by Akbar. But never did I imagine I would see a day when it felt as though Hiran himself became the arbiter of a man's fate. It happened about a year after the rebel Pratap Singh's ordeal. The empire was at peace, and life in Fatehpur Sikri had settled into its luxurious routine. I was still working in the palace, now a slightly older and wiser young man. My experiences had both awed and sobered me. I had seen how the emperor's justice could be uncompromising, and also how it could be tempered. I had developed a deep respect for Akbar and even for Hiran, the elephant who had become such a symbol of that justice. One morning, news swept through the court that a significant crime had been uncovered, a plot involving theft from the imperial treasury. A sum of gold coins and precious jewels had gone missing from the royal coffers. Investigations pointed to a particular suspect, a young treasury scribe named Arif. I knew Arif in passing. He was a quiet, studious fellow around my age, who kept mostly to himself. The accusations shocked those who knew him. It was alleged that he had been altering account records and siphoning off treasure bit by bit, in collusion with some outside traders. The loss was substantial enough to anger Akbar greatly. The emperor could forgive personal slights, perhaps, but stealing from the people's treasury, that was an offense against the realm. Arif protested his innocence vehemently. He claimed that he was being framed, that a higher-up official had orchestrated the theft and pinned it on him. However, evidence had been found in his quarters, a small pouch of gold coins stamped with the royal seal. I later heard whispers that those coins might have been planted there, but at the time it was damning proof. The trial was swift, and Arif was found guilty by the court's qazi. Given the magnitude of the crime, The sentence was death by trampling. Hiran's dreadful service was once more called upon. The execution was scheduled for midday in the Diwan-i-Am. A hush of anticipation hung in the air as the hall filled with onlookers. Treasury officials were present in force, faces grim at seeing one of their own meet such an end. Many common citizens had also come, drawn by the gravity of a treasury theft case. Such incidents were rare under Akbar's efficient administration. I arrived early and stood near one of the carved stone railings, straining to get a view. Part of me felt uneasy. Unlike the merchant Haridas, who'd practically confessed his greed, or the bandit who was clearly guilty, Arif's case had a strange aura. He had maintained his innocence to the last. I had no way of knowing the truth, but my instincts and what I knew of him made me doubt he was a scheming thief. Unfortunately, what I thought mattered little. It was now in the hands of fate, or rather, at the feet of Hiran. Emperor Akbar appeared and took his seat, his expression dark. This betrayal had clearly angered him. The vizier signaled, and the guards brought Arif forward. The young man was in chains and flanked by 2 armored soldiers. He looked pale and disoriented, as if he hadn't slept in days. Yet there was a certain calm on his face. He wasn't wailing or begging. Instead, as he was made to stand on the execution spot, I saw him close his eyes briefly and move his lips in silent prayer. Perhaps he had resigned himself to death, trusting that God knew he was innocent, if indeed he was. The Qazi read out the verdict one final time, and a herald announced the sentence. Emperor Akbar said nothing. He only gave a curt nod. I could sense that even he took no relish in this execution. It was a matter of duty and law to him. A familiar bell tolled. All eyes turned as Hiran was led into the hall by Ghulam. Even after all this time, the sight of that great elephant entering solemnly made my heart quicken. Hiran moved to his usual position for an execution, just a few paces from the condemned. The hall fell into deep silence, broken only by the rustle of fabric and a few distant coughs. Many held their breath. Arif was trembling slightly, but he did something that surprised everyone. As the guards attempted to push him down into a bowing position, to expose his head for the fatal stomp, Arif instead knelt on his own accord and then sat back on his heels. He raised his tied hands upward in a posture of supplication, not toward the emperor, but toward Akbar and Hiran both. Then he spoke, in a clear but quavering voice that echoed in the stillness. "If I am guilty, let me perish. If I am innocent, I leave my fate to the Almighty." A few people murmured. One of the guards barked at him to be quiet. Emperor Akbar leaned forward slightly, brow furrowed. Something in Arif's demeanor perhaps struck him. It struck me, certainly. There was a sincerity, a dignity to this young man in his final moments that one would not expect from a caught criminal. He didn't curse anyone, nor did he explicitly beg the emperor for mercy. He simply proclaimed his truth and surrendered to whatever would come. At Akbar's signal, Ghulam gave Hiran the command. I watched, heart hammering, as Hiran's trunk swung low and sniffed at Arif. The elephant's great head tilted as he examined the kneeling figure. Arif, rather than recoiling, actually reached out slowly with his bound hands and touched Hiran's trunk. A collective gasp rose from the audience. Such a thing had never been seen. Normally, the condemned were too terrified to move, or they tried to flee. But Arif gently placed his palms on Hiran's trunk and bowed his head, almost as if in reverence or seeking a blessing. Hiran paused. He remained still as a statue for a few seconds, trunk in Arif's hands. I could see Arif's lips moving again in prayer, perhaps whispering to the elephant or to God or both. The mahout called out another command, a sharper one meant to prompt Hiran to perform the execution. Hiran's trunk slipped from Arif's grasp. The elephant raised it high and gave a loud trumpet that made several people jump. Then he lifted his right foot. I felt a sickening certainty that the young man was about to be crushed like all the others. I had to look away for an instant, but the fatal impact never came. Instead of slamming down, Hiran's foot hovered in the air above Arif's bowed form. He let out a low rumble that reverberated through the hall. Slowly, Hiran lowered his foot beside Arif. The elephant placed his foot on the ground next to the kneeling man, not on him. It was as if Hiran had deliberately chosen to spare